Chapter 36. Breakfast. Early the next morning, a solitary horseman might have been seen loping easily along and up Fifth Avenue. The animal was a stallion, black as night, and as superb a creature as ever carried a rider on its back. And dark was the rider, and handsome, and gracefully and skilfully managed the spirited steed. Through the park, via the East Drive, loped the stallion. At the Mount St. Vincent, the rider reined up and dismounted. Mike, the hostler, always at the fore, led the stallion round to the stable. He knew the animal and did not essay to mount him. The rider entered the smoking room. The hour being early, 9, there were no visitors present. Count du Barry, head gentleman in waiting, at the refractory, arrayed in conventional black, with white necktie, entered immediately, however, with the great dignity that characterizes him on all occasions. Smiling blandly and gracefully drawing through his left hand a snow-white napkin of good proportions, he advanced towards the early visitor, and said in his courtly way, "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, du Barry," was the response of the other. "How's Radford?" "Well, sir. He's had the gout, but's well now, sir." "I'm glad. And how's the Colonel? Colonel Long?" "He's always well, sir. Fine day for the races. Your breakfast is ready, sir." "You're prompt, du Barry." "Always prompt, sir," returned the Count, with a courtly bow. "I'll have it on the back piazza, Count." "All right, sir." "Introduce it with a small widow." "Yes, sir." "Who's been here of late, Count?" "Who were here yesterday?" asked the early visitor, seating himself at a table on the rear piazza, on which a tempting breakfast was displayed, of the courtly attaché of Mount St. Vincent House. "Everybody, sir. George Jervis was out with his blacks, and Colonel Coe with his bays. Frank Ball was here, and Harry Hill was out with his Hambletonians. Chris O'Connor was out with his span, Peanuts and Mush, and young George Law, with his blacks and white cross-matched pair. Ed Jones and Billy Rogers dropped in, and the Moss brothers with their sorrels. Charlie Weeks and his old blue mare, and old roadster of 60 winters, and Lane, the liveryman, with his bay colt. Morgan Jones with his black and white, and Finn Ingraham, Sol Sales and his bays, and Jack Lynch, the diamond man, Kelso with his bay, and Kirk with his black roan. Commodore Vanderbilt and Bonner— "There, that'll do, Count. Give us a rest now," said the listener with a laugh, transferring from a dish to his plate the forequarter of a chicken. "I can tell him all, sir, and—" "I'm sparing you the telling, Count. You may cut the strings of that bottle, if you please." It was 10 o'clock when Cleo emerged from the park and struck into Harlem Lane, along which she proceeded at an easy canter, having the road to herself nearly, a few jockeys only exercising their horses on Gotham's favorite trotting ground. A little way she cantered slowly, and then gave Thunderbolt his head in the spur, when he dashed off, tearing up the lane like a black tornado, loosened on a mission of destruction, and with all the speed. The rapid clatter and the thunder of his hoofs as he flew along the trotting highway brought everybody that happened to be about the hotels to the front, and among those on the portico at Harry Bertolf's was McDaniels, the owner of Harry Bassett, Joe Daniels, and other celebrated flyers, who gazed at the speeding stallion with animated interest, with admiration and desire for possession. "I'll give $25,000 for that stallion," he exclaimed, as the magnificent black sped by like the wind, with easy-moving limbs and graceful motion. "You'd be perfectly safe in offering 100,000 for him, Mac," volunteered Colonel Long, who had just pulled up at Harry's, on his way downtown from Harlem, and who was seated in his wagon as Cleo flew by. "Who does he belong to?" inquired the turfman, still looking after the speeding stallion. "A downtown young lady, and the boys say the one riding him, and known as Don Juan, is the young lady herself," said the response of the colonel, a stout-built, pleasant-eyed man, with a long grey beard. "Eh? You don't say so!" exclaimed the turfman, looking at the colonel for an instant with surprise, and then looking after the stallion far up the road, with a covetous eye. Well, she's a horseman, he said at length with a laugh, giving up his gaze. He's a powerful animal, and a wonderful stepper, that stallion, he added, and I'd like him in my stud. Chapter 37. On the Road. 4 hours later, and Cleo again passed Harry Bertolph's, going north as before, bound for Fordham, Jerome Park, and the races. The time she passed in a light and elegant landaulet drawn by a spanking team of bays that whirled the vehicle along as though it, with its occupants, Cleo and Prince, was not the slightest hindrance to their rapidity of motion, excelled by that of very few only of the trotters on the way to the racing park. Our heroine, now in the attire of her sex, was magnificently arrayed in a deep but bright blue dress of the costliest silk, made up and trimmed in the most fashionable style and most expensive manner. For the benefit of our lady readers, and the ladies all like to read how other ladies dress, we will say this superb dress was set off by a frieze of Mechlin lace, a real thread-lace black shawl, and a beautiful crimson scarf pinned with a diamond, and resting carelessly on her shoulders, her monogram, embroidered in blue, on the ends. She wore a brigand hat, from which gracefully drooped a long and beautiful feather of brilliant blue, fastened to her hat by a diamond. Her gloves were blue, and she carried a few of scarlet feathers, with a blue bird in the center of the inside. Brilliant and beautiful was her attire, and brilliant and beautiful was she. The day was superb, and the road to Fordham was lined with magnificent vehicles of every style, drawn by horses that pranced along, as if proud of the precious freights of feminine beauty they drew after them, or as if, in their sleek coats and gorgeous trappings, they felt themselves to be the most important beings in the moving show. What with the multitudinous array of carriages of all kinds, moving at all rates of speed, what with the freights of fashionable feminines, fair and dark, petite and grande, gay and beautiful, youthful and mature, with silks and satins, shells and scarfs, fans and flowers, ribbons and feathers of multifarious hues, floating and fluttering in the breeze, with black and white elegant laces, with the gleam of golden bracelets and chains, earrings and pins, the flash of diamonds, and the brilliant hues of other costly gems, and what with the horses in their sleekest coats of white and cream and roan, dapple grey, black and chestnut, sorrel, brown and bay, in harness plain, or mounted rich with gold and silver. What with all these, the road to Fordham presented a most bewildering scene, and one of beauty the most picturesque. And of all the gay beauties rolling along in that endless line of carriages, and Gotham's most beautiful girls were being whirled over the road, had they been gathered together, as later most of them were, on the grand stand, at Jerome Park, not one would have a clip to our heroine in her peerless brilliancy of beauty, while very few would have compared with her. Cleo was in the gayest of spirits, as she was in her most brilliant beauty, and why should she not have been? Was she not going to give herself away that day? First to Mrs. Grundy, then to Harry Prince. The gayest of the gay she was, in spirits, the most glorious of all in her radiant, brilliant, matchless beauty. And if the man at her side was not happy, supremely happy for a mortal, his countenance was no true indicator, for happiness unalloyed was plainly imprinted there. Hundreds of vehicles were passed by her own, pulled along as it was by her powerful, swift-moving bays, at the rate of 15 miles an hour, and it, in turn, was passed by hundreds of trotting wagons, drawn by the fastest horses on Harlem Lane, and to hundreds of the occupants of these carriages was Cleo known personally, to as many feminines, perhaps, as masculines, though receiving more frequent recognition from the latter than the former, and as our readers are abundantly able to make their own deductions in the premises, we need not explain why this was thus. But what cared Cleopatra Clayton whether the ladies to whom she was personally known recognized or slighted her? What cared she whether one or all declined to recognize her? Not a fig, not a snap of the finger. Chapter 38. The Grand Stand. The Grand Stand at Jerome Park. Good day and good track, and the races promising. What a scene the Grand Stand presents! Nowhere in this country, on a racing or any other day, does such an imposing scene present itself. Fashion and finery, style and elegance, with wealth and name to back them, and these with only the latter at their back, and then again, fashion and finery with only the former at their back, and then glitter and glare, show and sham, shoddy included, with or without the wealth at their back, and all without a social standing. What a sea of lovely faces, what a display of magnificent toilets, what gorgeous colors, brilliant hues, charming tints and delicate shades, what a mingling of ribbons and roses, and laces and lawns, of satin and silks and velvet and fabrics rare. What a gleaming of gold and flashing of gems, what a flutter of fans and floating of feathers, what stunning coiffures, what tiny hats, what elegant shawls and what beautiful scarfs, what tiny gloved hands and monster bracelets, what ravishing smiles and killing glances, what glee, animation, and interest, what chic, esprit, hauteur, and vanité, what cheek, what airs, what dignity, what pride, what polish, raidesse, affection, and consequence, what modesty, hardesse, envy, and triumph, what gaiety, serenity, insouciance, and wit, what sparkle and glitter and show. In short, what a picture does the grandstand at Jerome Park present, when Gotham turn out its wealth and beauty, its shoddy and its show, to view the fleeting coursers of the turf when they contest the palm with the swiftest speed. 'Tis a scene of picturesque beauty, reader, and a joy until the races are over, and everyone will say who has an eye for the picturesquely beautiful, who had been to the park on a racing day. And then, on the occasion of this visit of our heroine to the park, which always found her there on racing days, the grand stand never presented a more brilliant, distingué, and picturesque appearance, for Gotham had sent its fair and its brave by the thousands there. She had come over from the clubhouse to the grand stand with Prince, a member of the club, and a large party of ladies and gentlemen. Among the latter were Larry Jerome, the bluff and hearty, Travers, the genial and witty, Joe, the blond and blithe, Harry Palmer, the black crook man, Shedshook, John Chamberlain, Don Kingsland, of the Academy, and others, and with this party she took her seat, the observed of all observers as she approached and ascended the stand, and the observed of all who could observe her, until the races commenced she was. Chapter 39. The Dashes. The hour for the races was at hand. There were to be 4 contests, the last, and by all odds the greatest, a steeplechase. Doc Underwood was still selling pools, knocking down favourites, other flyers, and fields as rapidly as was his wont, in his usual honeyed tones and beguiling words. Hundreds and hundreds of gentlemen were passing over the green sward in front of the grand stand, to and fro between the pool stand of the dock at one, and the French pools at the other end of the stand. And hundreds dotted the quarter stretch, some well up in horse-flesh, some with a smack of equine love, but many knowing no more about the points of a horse than about the apocalypse, which probably was very little. At length the bell sounded, calling the racers in the first contest to the front. Up with the numbers, and out from their stables, came the blanketed flyers, 9 in number, for a canter round the course. 15 minutes, and the 9 faced the starter, at the 3/4 pole, and got off at the second attempt, all in a bunch, as close, almost, as so many peas in a pod. At the dropping flag, indicating a go an instant after, 3 of them, Grey Planet, Ortolan, and Buckton, drew ahead of their competitors, the latter named leading at the furlong pole, but the former, when the field well together, passed the stand, the foremost of them all by a head. "Well, Cleo, which is the winner for a box of gloves? The favourite, Ortolan?" queried Prince of our heroine. "Or shall I name the winner?" was the added interrogatory. "I'll name him, Hal, but not the favourite. You know I never take favourite," was Cleo's response. "Boss Tweed, one of the field, perhaps," said Prince, laughing. "No, the boss had his day," returned Cleo with a laugh. "I'll name Preakness," she said, gazing after the flyers, now rounding the turn by the picnic grounds. The race was a 1.25 mile dash, and Grey Planet at the quarter pole was still leading the 9, but so close in a bunch were the 5 flyers, of which he was foremost, that between him, the first, and Mate, the 5th, there was scarce a length's difference. Rounding the turn, after speeding down the hill, the favourite, Ortolan, came to the fore, rejoicing the hearts of his backers, those who had paid for him in the pools, over $1 more than any of the other that the 9 sold for. Prince turned with a glance at Cleo, as the favourite was seen to have the lead, and the 5 going out of sight. Then, in the crook, by the bluff, our heroine lowered her lorgnette, saying, "Time enough for the first to be last in the race," and then raised the lorgnette to her eyes again. A moment or two, and the flyers again came to view, but during their absence from sight, quite a change in their positions had taken place. Who was first when they rounded the bluff was nowhere now, Preakness and Mate, from Sanford's stables, having the lead by 3 lengths, and going neck and neck. "Where's the favourite now?" interrogated Cleo, without removing the glasses from her eyes, and without getting any response from Prince, too deeply interested to respond. Swinging round the lower turn, and into the home stretch, the coursers showed no change in position, and came bounding home, the 2 above mentioned leading the field, and going close together. Belonging to one man, it was certain there would be no dead heat, but which of the 2, Preakness or Mate, would first reach the goal, was known only to the owner and jockeys. A few bounds settled it, however. Mate forged ahead, and passed under the string, a winner by 6 lengths, the favourite, Ortolan, first with the fancy, first in the pools, and first at the bluff, being last in the race. Cleo lost a box of gloves, but as the favourite, she never wagered on the favourite in any contest, lost, she was satisfied. The race over, 2/3 of the masculine portion of the throng on the grandstand, with hundreds of other masculines from all quarters, rushed to the judges' stand and quarter stretch, those having badges for the latter to get a close-at-hand view of the victor in the contest. And soon the insinuating voice of the doctor was heard, and the selling of pools commenced and became lively. The second race was a splendid one, in which a field of 10 3-year-olds, as fine colts as ever were foaled, contested in the Bellman Stakes. There was no decided favourite. 3 of the youngsters, Springbuck, Brettlebane colt, and Count d'Orsay, selling in the pools, just before the dash, at the same figure. Of these 3, Count d'Orsay, perhaps, had among the throng at large the greater number of admirers, and Prince naming him the winner, for a box of gloves. Cleo took the wager, making good for her loss on the first race, Springbok coming in the winner, the Count following close at his heels, the second in the race. "Hal," said Cleo to Prince, after the second event of the day was over, "I can name the winner of the steeplechase, for a basket." "I think I can too," returned Prince with a laugh, he knowing what horses were to run, out of a number entered. "Name it," said Cleo. "Lochiel." "No, the name of the winner is there," said our heroine, handing to Prince a small sealed envelope as she spoke. "For a basket," she added, and then said, rising, "Let us go over to the clubhouse. I don't care for the 3/4 mile dash next to come off." And the 2 left the grandstand for the clubhouse on the hill opposite. A field of 11 flyers, all ages, appeared at the call of the bell for the third race, a dash of 3/4 mile, which was desperately contested by at least 3 of the field, that number coming home under the string in a bundle, scarcely anyone but the judges being able to pick out the winner.
Chapter 40. The Steeplechase. In due time, the bell called the steeplechasers to the front, only 3 appearing out of quite a number nominated for the most stirring event of the day, and the one most eagerly awaited by interested spectators of equine contests at Jerome and other parks where these exciting and hazardous exhibitions obtain. Lochiel, Duffy, and Victor were the 3 flyers and jumpers to put in an appearance, the former the favorite, selling in a $700 pool at $400, Duffy bringing $300, and Victor, auspicious name, $30 only. He was an unknown horse, a new aspirant for steeplechase honors, and, consequently, sold low in the pools, parties buying him not upon judgment, but taking the chances of accident, with the long odds against him. As the trio paraded in front of the grandstand, they were viewed by the thousands there with the deepest interest, and many were the comments upon this one and that one, and many the opinions hazarded as to the winner in the struggle to come, Lochiel and Duffy being named with confidence by the friends of either, Victor being looked upon by some as a possible but not probable winner. Just as they faced the starter, there suddenly appeared on the rocky knoll just north of the clubhouse a horseman mounted on a superb black steed, a large, powerful animal of high mettle and splendid action. The rider was dressed in gray, even to his cap of jockey pattern. The suddenly appearing apparition was noticed, probably, by everyone on the grandstand, as well as by hundreds in other quarters. "Who's that?" was probably asked by 1,000 men and women. Lorgnettes were leveled at the gray horseman by hundreds, the field of jumpers being for once forgotten. "It's that young devil of a Don Juan!" exclaimed a gentleman an instant before 100 others similarly exclaimed. "Don Juan? Sneered a lady, the companion of the first speaker. "That settles the question as to whether Cleo Clayton and Don Juan are one," said a gentleman a little removed from the lady speaker. "For she's here," he continued. "I saw her not 10 minutes ago." "So everybody saw her. She just went over to the clubhouse," said another gent. And another, "I wonder what he's up to now." A lady to her escort, probably her husband, from the tone of his reply. "I'll bet you anything it's her, that Cleo Clayton is Don Juan." "Bosh. You are one of the quidnuncs." "I don't care now. I'll bet." "Nonsense. What's the use of my betting with you? If I lost, I'd have to pay. And if I won, well, I'd have to pay then too," returned the gentleman, laughing. 1,000 remarks were uttered bearing on the question of identity in the case of Cleo Clayton versus Don Juan. Very few gentlemen hazarded a positive opinion in the premises. That is, very few expressed a belief that Cleo and the Don were one and the same being. And while some didn't know, couldn't tell, didn't care, the many scouted the idea. But the ladies, dear creatures, they knew all about it. They did. The most of them, you know. Though some were non-committal, and a few believed no such thing. The idea. To the knowing ones, the fact that Cleo was on the ground and the habiliments of her sex made not the slightest difference. They knew, and that settled it. Those anxious to wager, handkerchiefs, gloves, and so forth, and they were not a few, were married women who wanted to bet with their lords. But the lady loves, though certain of it, that Cleo was Don Juan and vice versa, couldn't be brought up to the scratch by their lovers. They wouldn't put up. Neither would they shut up. Still, they knew. You couldn't tell them. The start of the jumpers, a most capital one, drew all eyes from the solitary horseman to the 3 steeplechasers, and in the concentrated gaze of the deepest interest, Cleo Clayton and Don Juan were forgotten for the moment. Off with a bound at the dropping of the flag went the 3 coursers, Victor leading and taking the first hurdle in good style, as did the other 2, one of whom, Duffy, came to the front, the leader of the 3 the moment after the hurdle was jumped, Victor trailing last, with Lochiel second. In this order the 3, straining every nerve and muscle, dashed on, jumping the low rail fence of the track into the north field, and so close that no cheers came from the backers of the leader, and no handkerchiefs waved in the hands of the ladies. The grandstand was as still as night, its occupants breathlessly excited. The chase was long, and the winner couldn't be told yet. "Ha! Look, see!" These exclamations burst suddenly from 100 throats, feminine as well as masculine, thousands of eyes being turned towards the rocky rise at the north of the clubhouse. The solitary horseman. Where was he? Down the rocks with the rider in gray, the black steed plunged, over a fence to the track, over another to the field, and he was off with the speed of the wind on the trail of the flyers in his fore. Every eye was upon that black stallion, whose prodigious strides, easy and graceful movements brought many exclamations of wonder and admiration from the lips of men and women, and exclamations, too, of surprise escaped from the lips of the spectators of the scene, who wondered at the audacious act of the rider in gray, at whom every glass was leveled. Sweeping on with the velocity of a tornado, the black stallion bounded over the green sward, in the wake of the steeplechasers contending for the mastery in his front. On with the bounds that a steed of supernatural powers might take, sped the stallion, taking fences and ditches and walls with the ease of a winged courser, the rider in gray sitting him as though the steed he bestrode, and himself, were one and indivisible. Over a hurdle at the foot of the hill, then a slight falling jump, and into the south field he dashed after the flyers in his front, passing Victor, the hindmost of the three, in 2 bounds, Duffy, the leader, 12 lengths away, in advance. Over a hurdle, across 2 ditches, and over a rail fence went Duffy and Lochiel, the stallion thundering after, and gaining at every stride. To say that the chase was not rendered more deeply interesting by the unexpected entrance of the 4th horse would be to say what the reader would know to the contrary. It deepened the interest tenfold. All present, those to whom the rider and steed were unknown, as well as those to whom both were known, the former as Don Juan, and those even who had backed either of the regular field, were interested to the utmost, and not a little excited, the betters as much so as any others, as, if the stallion should come in ahead, it would not affect those who backed the legitimate winner, one of the trio. The intrusion, audacious as it was not relished, perhaps, by the managers of the course, by the owners of the horses in the race, nor by some others, very likely, but even these could not but watch the sport with deepened interest, the unheard-of intrusion imparting to the affair a zest it would not have otherwise possessed, not to speak of the beauty, action, and speed of the stallion, the latter quality so great it showed, drawing their wonder and admiration. It was an innovation, certainly, and an audacious one, but nevertheless, to the mass, one that was relished, the great majority enjoying the thing hugely, as people always do anything not on the bills, provided the same be not disagreeable. Circling round the field, Duffy started up on a line with the horse stretch, taking a fence easily near the furlong pole, Lochiel gaining rapidly as the water jump was approached, over which he quickly followed the leader, Thunderbolt taking the water gap at the same instant with him, amid the greatest excitement on the part of the spectators, and much more to the well-being of his rider than the other horse. For he, landing badly, pitched his rider over his head to the ground, and helpless on the turf. Riderless, away he dashed, with Thunderbolt at his side. A few bounds and the latter led him, and took the hurdle in front of the public stand just as Duffy cleared it, Lochiel following quickly after. Crossing the track, the stallion jumped in a ditch with Duffy, both landing at the same instant amid the most tremendous excitement, with cheering and shouting of men, waving of handkerchiefs and clapping of hands of women. 5 to 1 in hundreds on the black, shouted the gentleman, with a handful of greenbacks held forth. There were no takers. Everyone knowing anything about a horse felt that, barring accidents, the black would make the finish first. He's a rattler. What a jumper! Jumps like a deer. Isn't he a beauty? He's perfectly splendid. Hundreds of similar exclamations were drawn from the interested spectators, and Colonel McDaniels, standing with John Chamberlain, reiterated his words uttered when the stallion tore through Harlem Lane in the morning, that he would give him $25,000 for the stallion. There he goes! Over the rails, ahead. Hurrah! Exclaimed and shouted the excited gentleman who wanted to bet 5 to 1 on the black, who, as he spoke, cleared the rails in front of Duffy, and bounded up the picnic hill with magnificent action and far-reaching strides. The leader now of the steeplechasers, the riderless Lochiel being second, he having passed Duffy. Going up the hill, Lochiel bolted for the stable, and Duffy, though he had a rider, did likewise, with Thunderbolt a dozen lengths away to the fore. The black went flying over the stone wall, dashed down the rocks, crossed the track into the field, taking another stone wall in the grandest style, the excitement of the spectators being at the highest, and knowing no bounds when the rider in grey took off his cap and waved it, and bowed in acknowledgment. Then for home came the stallion, again jumping the hurdle with the 2 sunken ditches in the south field, then into the main track, taking one more in the last in splendid style, making for the judges' stand with a speed that was marvelous, and action that was so easy and graceful that it was the very poetry of motion, the magnificent finish eliciting the wildest applause. Under the string he passed, the victor of the steeplechase, but not the victor, who, tearing in shortly after, a neck in front of Duffy, was declared the victor, winning for his backers one of the best pools ever sold. The steeplechase was at an end. A moment, and back from the judges' stand, over the track in front of the grandstand came cantering the black stallion, a long blue feather floating gracefully over his neck, toying with his tossing mane. His appearance was greeted with a rousing cheer, and the waving of hats and handkerchiefs. The rider took off his cap, reined in his steed, reared him high in the air, and passing a hand through his hair, and shaking his head, down fell a mass of coal-black hair, long and thick, glossy and silken. The next moment his hand went to his face, and in an instant the graceful mustache he wore had vanished, the rider bowing most gracefully and smiling most sweetly. "Cleo Clayton, by Jove!" "'Tis her, 'tis her. Cleo Clayton." "Well, I declare!" I told you so! I knew it! Such were the exclamations from 1,000 lips as the laughing beauty gave herself away, enjoying the affair highly, knowing well of the horror that would sit upon the brow of many a woman there. In the classic language of Xantip, Mr. Socrates' sweet helpmate, it was nuts for her. 3 cheers for Cleo Clayton! Sung out a handsome gentleman, a bachelor, probably, not having the fear of Mrs. Grundy before his eyes. 3 cheers for Don Juan! Sung out another, with a laugh which found a chorus. 3 cheers for the Black Horse, the noblest runner of them all! Shouted an enthusiastic lover of the horse-flesh, swinging his hat. A round of cheers, a wild, prolonged cheering followed, everyone standing, some cheering for Cleo Clayton, some for Don Juan, and some for Thunderbolt, but all cheering, the men, while the ladies waved their handkerchiefs, many of them, perhaps, involuntarily. Amused and gratified beyond measure, Cleo, with another bow and another smile, gave Thunderbolt the spur when he bounded off at lightning speed, followed by the cheers of the multitude. Taking the fence in splendid style, he struck the road, and in a few moments was lost to sight. With this, the steeplechase, Cleopatra's masquerade came to an end. 1 hour after, in the attire which she wore to the park, she was married to Prince, whom she had long loved, the ceremony being performed by Alderman Larry Jerome in the clubhouse, in presence of an immense concourse of ladies and gentlemen, a magnificent entertainment coming after. As for the 1,001 comments and remarks that were uttered upon the occasion of her own voluntary exposé, we leave our readers to imagine, but will simply say that it was astonishing how many ladies of those present at the informal and unconventional bridal and subsequent entertainment declared the masquerade of Cleo's to be a most capital joke, splendidly carried out, and all that sort of thing, you know. Not one but what courted the smiles in favor of the magnificent woman, the newly made bride, who graciously bestowed them lavishly on all. That the bride and groom may be happy through life is the wish of the writer and the wish of the reader, we know. The end.